Hello, this is Priscilla from Speakers Connect. Today we're very happy to have James Taylor, creativity speaker, with us. So James, thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure, Priscilla. It's always lovely having a conversation with you.
Yeah, indeed. So now you're in the UK, right?
Yes, I'm in Scotland at the moment, and it's sunny, it's beautiful. The weather's finally changed, which is very nice. So getting a little bit of a chance to enjoy some of the nice weather just now.
Excellent. So I know that you actually have a background in the music industry, managing rock stars. How did you end up being a speaker on creativity and innovation?
Yeah, it was like, I mean, we think about it, sometimes, you go and study at university and you really end up doing the job that you studied for a degree for example. So my story was a little bit similar to that, where my father was a musician, a professional jazz musician. My grandfather was a musician. So it was always kind of expected to kind of go into the family business, being in the music. And initially when I started, I was a jazz drummer initially. And I kind of, when I first kind of left school, I was touring around the world a lot. And then I really got interested in the business side of things. And I actually went back and I did an MBA, and I studied around the business. And then I started managing the careers of other artists. And then as a result of that, I ended up managing a number of very successful music artists, pop artists, working with lots of kind of Grammy award-winning music artists. And then in around 2010, I got a call one day from this gentleman who had previously been one of the founding team at AOL. And after AOL had been sold to Time Warner, he had a real passion for online education and teaching online. And he said, James, I'm starting all these online music schools and arts schools in California. Would you come over and help me kind of work on building all of these online schools? And so I headed over to California, moved family over there. And then over the next few years, I think we built about 30 online schools, online academies with just wonderful Grammy award-winning artists teaching, tens of thousands of people all around the world. And as I was doing that, I was getting very involved so I kind of always had this very strong interest in creativity by the nature of always working with very creative individuals. But then I also saw a little bit of a disconnect when I would kind of got more involved in the business world. And you saw a lot of people who didn't necessarily think of themselves as creative. They didn't talk about creativity in the same way in business. It's changing a little bit now. So moving to California, I started to get involved in things like artificial intelligence, learning about how that worked, because I was living kind of in the San Francisco Bay Area, kind of Silicon Valley kind of area. And then as a result of that, I just started getting more calls again. James, would you come and speak at this event? Would you speak at this conference? Would you speak at this conference? And it was funny because it almost felt like I was coming home, going back on stages again. It was like going back to what I used to do as a child, going up on stages, performing, giving concerts. So it was actually felt very natural to me to be able to do that. And then it really just kind of snowballed. It was very, very quick, really in the space of about 3 years, getting started, making that decision to become a speaker, a professional speaker. And then really last year, I think I spoke in 26 countries last year, about 50 something keynotes. I do most of the keynotes, do some workshops, creativity workshops as well, but mostly working with large multinational companies, giving keynotes at big global conferences, or working with their teams, their sales teams, their innovation teams, on really helping them come up with the ideas that help going to grow their business. So that's kind of where I ended up today, but it was a very strange, circuitous kind of route to get there.
So you have been identified by others as a speaker.
Yes, I mean, it was not, some people say speaking they almost like feel like as a calling they have to do. For me, it just always felt very natural.
Natural.
It was a very natural thing to be on stage. I love just that, spending that time interacting with audiences, and I also kind of feel that because I had a lot of background in online education, working things on camera, for example, that we're also seeing a little bit of a transition going on at the moment, where many of speakers in previous eras were what we call the sage on the stage. They were the big, that kind of way of presenting in that style. But so many of us, the people that we trust most now, we trust them because we're watching them on our iPhones, and they're maybe YouTube stars or Instagram stars on Weibo or wherever they are. So the style kind of actually starts to change. And so I feel I do the, the kind of stage on the stage stuff, we do the very big kind of style, but then I also love doing the kind of guide on the side. Where I'm just having those kind of more smaller groups where you're just working with maybe 100 people in a room, and you're just helping them to figure out, it could be they're trying to reduce costs, or they're thinking about how to become more, improve the efficiency of their organization, or they're wanting to come up with new campaigns to launch new products. So I love being able to do those two different things.
Right, right. So we are now going through a very strange time. And I know that you mentioned a lot of times that now we need creativity more than ever before.
Yeah.
So can we know more about that?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a big fan of creativity. I speak about it, I write about it, I film about it all the time, I talk about it. But interestingly, what's happened is a lot of research has been coming out recently showing how creativity is becoming more important. And I'll give you a couple of studies that just came out recently. One was from the World Economic Forum, and they actually showed that creativity is moving from the 10th most important job skill to the third most important job skill this year, as we're filming this year in 2020. That's because machines are frankly doing many of the more routine, non-creative roles that we currently do in our jobs. They can essentially replacing all those. So the skills are most needed, the soft skills that are most needed today are things like creativity, collaboration, very strong kind of interpersonal skills, and actually where we're at just now, resilience is an incredibly important skill. So then there was another study done by LinkedIn, and they interviewed lots of different companies, leaders of different companies, and they said, what skills are you looking for now in your organization? Now, I think artificial intelligence was the number one kind of hard skill, which is great because I speak about AI as well. But actually, the number one soft skill was creativity, because they need people to come up with those ideas and solutions. And kind of more close to home, for example, in China, someone like Jack Ma the other day was being interviewed, and someone asked him, what skills should we be investing in our people, in our organizations, in our companies, our teams, in our countries? And he said, don't bother trying to compete with the machine on things that could do better, faster, and cheaper than you. You need to focus on that one advantage that you have as a human: your creativity, your curiosity, your ability to innovate. So all those things together, and it's just accelerating now more than ever, is what kind of leads me to believe, and many other leaders to believe, that creativity is like one of the most important job skills now.
If it is so important, I would like to know why so many people think that they are not creative enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, if you spend time with children, for example, and you give them some crayons, or you give them a puzzle or something to solve, you see them get completely lost in doing that. They're in what psychologists would call a flow state. It's a beautiful thing to watch. They just get lost. Now, if you think of your average office or work environment, as you look around your colleagues, are they in that kind of same flow state, being curious, being creative, losing themselves? Not too often. So really what happened is, partly it was a result of education systems, and different education systems in different parts of the world can really kind of knock that creative confidence that we have. And then when we go essentially into work, we go and study at college or university, we're taught all the conventions the way that it kind of should be, we're taught all the rules. And that's very important. We need to be taught the conventions. These are the rules that we're working within. But it's also important to be able to challenge those rules, to push those rules, to try and that's how innovation, that's how we move forward as civilizations. So really one of the main reasons that held us back is because we've been taught a number of things as adults, or as when we're at school, that really stop and stamp down on that creativity that we were all born with. Now, the good news is that's something that we can reclaim and we can get back. So if you look around the world today, depending on where I'm asking this question, you'll tend to find anywhere between 40% to 60% of people will consider themselves to be creative. It varies based upon geography. So that's a bit of a challenge, because you think about that, most people then in business or in the world of work don't consider themselves to have the one skill that's most needed. So when I come in and work with organizations, whether I go in keynote or if they bring me in to maybe do I was in Asia recently, we were doing an event we did together for a very well-known client in a food company. And I come in and I can actually measure someone's creativity or those people's creativity at the start. I'll do a half-day training or a full-day training with them. At the end of that, I'll actually see their creativity levels increase. So creativity is something, it's like learning a skill. You can get better at it again.
Right. So when we talk about creativity, there's another term that a lot of people use very often, which is innovation.
Yes.
What is the difference between innovation and creativity? Sometimes we mix between the two, but I think there should be some differences, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's also quite interesting just now because there's also a generational difference. It used to always be that creativity was something that was talked about in the arts, for example.
Mm,
If you went to theatre, it was, they were doing something creative, or a cook. If you went to a great restaurant, oh, he's a really creative chef. And it always used to be in business. It was innovation was the word that was used. But I've actually been tracking it and seeing how things are changing. Partly it's a result of more millennials coming into the workforce who feel much more comfortable using the word creativity. And I'm also seeing it now on annual reports, company websites, when they list their values. Some of them are shifting it now from innovation to creativity, which I think is very, very interesting. So the way I perceive this is essentially creativity and innovation are just different sides of the same coin. Uh, Creativity is about bringing new ideas to the mind. Innovation is about bringing new ideas to the world. But without creativity, there is no innovation. Creativity is essentially the engine of innovation. Innovation tends to be more process orientated. Creativity tends to be more in terms of generative as well, but they really kind of work together. And when I go and speak at events, I often talk about these 5 stages of the creative process. And really about halfway, it starts often with creativity, individual, team, organizational creativity. And then gradually you start to see that move when you have to do things like standard operating procedures, SOPs, checklists. It moves a little bit more into the innovation as well. But they're very, very closely related. They're just different sides of the same coin, essentially.
right, right. So since creativity is so important, any tips for us to maybe develop our thinking skills more in a more creative way?
Yeah, so there's a framework I share with audiences, which is TIPS, TIPS, which just stands for team creativity, individual creativity, peer creativity, and super creativity. So team creativity is about, in an organization, how you get the best from that team to collaborate. You break down those silos in those organizations. So everyone's collaborating well. You're getting the highest productivity, the most number of ideas and new innovations in the business. Individual creativity is about the things that you and I can all do to develop our own creativity. So when we go to work or when we're just living our lives, we're operating at a very high, creative kind of standard, and we're easily generating, developing, and executing on new ideas. Then peer creativity is one of the reasons I love events, whether it's in-person events or kind of online events. Obviously, we're doing a lot of online events now. But this gets you together with your peers, other people in your field, to debate, discuss, and challenge each other's ideas. You can see a lot within the sciences, for example. That's a type of peer creativity. So one science in China is coming up with an idea, or Hong Kong's coming up with an idea. Someone's coming up with an idea in London, and they're sharing all these things together. And it's this idea of a very collaborative across different industries. And then finally, the super creativity, which is augmenting your human creativity with exponential technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics. So if we talk about the individual creativity, there's lots of things you can do. I kind of like sometimes think of them as creative hacks, little things you can do like a hacker just to quickly boost your creativity. So I'll give you a couple of simple examples. What we eat and drink can affect our levels of creativity as an individual. I was recently speaking in Bogota, Colombia, and I told what I'm about to tell you just now to the audience there, and I thought they were going to kill me because I said something which was very against saying there, but I like to challenge audiences. I think it's important to challenge audiences. So there was a study done recently by Martha Farrar, who's a neuroscience professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And what she found is high levels of caffeine in your diet, coffee, will reduce the number of ideas and insights that you will generate. That's because caffeine is very good for what we call the preparation stage of the creative process and the final stage of the creative process, because it's really about focusing you in. It's about convergent kind of type thinking, just getting very focused and get a lot of work done. But If you're looking to be more expansive in your thinking, to be open in your thinking, you want to actually dial down your caffeine levels. Drink tea, juices, waters, because there's something that goes on with it, with the body. It allows you to be much more expansive in your thinking. So that's got to do with the physiology of what we do, really. Now, other things I would say, there's lots of these different kind of creativity hacks. Another very, very simple one just now is something I usually tell audience, which is travel. And people think when I say that, how this idea of travel, you can get ideas and inspirations from different places. But it's not just about physically getting on a plane and going somewhere. Even if you have to go and walk to the store, for example, to buy groceries, walk a different route. Take a different way there. You're going to see different things. You're going to see different inputs in what you do. I don't know if you've ever done this. I love doing this sometimes if I'm planning on going somewhere, I want to go somewhere, I go on Google Maps and I walk around the streets on Google Maps, and it gives me just different ideas. Oh, wow, look at that store. That store sells that. I was in Thailand recently, and they have the bottles, which I thought were whiskey, that they were selling on the side of the street. It's actually gasoline. It's fuel. And so you kind of like, oh, that's interesting. So you kind of think about some of these things. So travel is very good. If we're stuck indoors, if you're isolated just now, go on Google Maps. Start getting that inspiration that way as well. And another really nice thing that you can do as an individual, just to start working almost at this kind of collaborative side, is get what we call a creative pair. So creative pairs are like Lennon and McCartney, Steve Jobs and Wozniak. Try and find someone who's maybe a different personality type to you, but you enjoy bouncing ideas off. And sometimes that's in a formal context. Maybe that's going to be a colleague at work, for example. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes maybe it's a peer. Someone doesn't even come from your industry, but they have maybe a different perspective on things. These are very good people just to be able to have ongoing kind of conversations, almost like little mini masterminds to discuss as well. I'll leave you with a final one. And this has got to do with a strange thing, but color, how color affects our levels of creativity. So there was a study done, there's actually been two studies, one done by the University of Berlin, another one done by the University of British Columbia. And they actually found that colors affect our processes and how we do things. So for example, the color red is a great color to have around you if you're doing work which requires high attention to detail, because it actually activates a part of the brain when we think about, looking at detail. But what they also found is the best color to have around you if you're doing work which requires about generating ideas, being expansive, being open in your thinking. The best color to have around you is the color green. It's one of why we often get some of our best ideas when we're walking in nature, and that color green is all around us. Now, I'm very lucky where I'm filming this from today. I'm in Scotland and I can open my blinds there and I've got green fields. Not everyone is fortunate to do that. So in your office space, do you have green around you? Do you have plants? Do you have things that are just activating that part of the brain? Are you going out? When you are able to go out your time each day, are you going out to a park to have that green that's activating that part of the brain? So these are just little kind of fun, little creativity hacks on how you can develop your own individual creativity.
Certainly. Wow, there's a lot of tips, and yeah, we should write it down and see how we can actually manage to increase our creativity. And I do have plants in my office, so I think that helps. So we talk about individuals. So how about teams? How we can help our team to improve their creative collaboration, for example?
Yeah, so there's lots of different things that we can do here. And I actually, the way that I teach it, and if I go into companies and do training with them, is using what we call creative thinking tools. I think one of the problems in the world of creativity is it can feel very soft. It doesn't really get your hand, well, what is it? And so I was talking to someone the other day, and they work at Coca-Cola. And their boss came in the other day and they had a challenge in one of the production factories. And the boss said to them, just be creative. Well, what does that mean? What does be creative mean? So I think it's much better to give people a set of tools that they can use, and also creates a common language. So they can say, okay, let's do an out on that. Let's do a random words exercise on that. So these are just tools I teach teams so they can have a common language to kind of come up with things. So one of the, a very simple little tool, if you work in an organization which has a very strong hierarchy, where sometimes if you're more junior in an organization, in order to save face for people, you don't necessarily want to challenge their ideas outright like that. And actually I speak a lot in the Middle East as well, and you can sometimes see this where you might have the chairman and that vice president or that manager has some ideas they want to share, but they're trying to do it in a respectful way. So this is the way that a very simple little technique. Now we're all heard of brainstorming, but there's another technique which is called brain writing, and it's very simple. Let me show you how it works. So let's say next time you get together with your team, it could be online, it could be on Zoom, for example, or it could be in person. Tell everyone in advance, let's say you have a challenge. So for example, we need to improve the efficiency of this particular process in this particular factory, for example. Now, normally what happens is when you come into the room in a brainstorming session, you'll have one person who holds the one whiteboard pen in the room, and it's his ideas, usually a man, that end up dominating the board. So we need to get as many ideas from as many people as possible and have diversity in the room. So this is how it works. Sit down, let's say you have a room of 8 people in a room, and everyone is told the problem in advance. No one has to say anything at the start. And then what we do is we ring a bell, and each person has some Post-it notes, and they just write down ideas, questions related to that particular challenge. What if we did this? Why is this the way that we're working this particular process? What if we did this? How could we do this? Just writing lots of different ideas, questions, thoughts. After a few minutes, you ring the bell. You then take all of those Post-it notes and you give them to the person to your right. No one is saying anything at this point. And then that person can either add to these ideas on the Post-it notes, or maybe it inspires them. Oh, that makes me think of this idea or this question. And they can add to that as well. And then you ring the bell, goes around, and it just continues to go the whole way around. So by the end of that, you've got lots of these Post-it notes with lots of ideas, lots of thoughts, lots of questions. Then what I suggest you do is have someone just put them up, all these Post-it notes up on a board or somewhere on the wall, and then maybe take a little break for tea. And then everyone has maybe a little marker pen, a little red pen, and just everyone gets maybe 3 votes. And so they can tick 3 of the cards, the ones that have the most interesting ideas, or most, I'd like to look at that, or has an interesting question. So if we found the answer to that, that could change things. So what happens then is you will have some cards which will have lots of ticks, and you'll have cards that will have less ticks or no ticks. The interesting thing is then you pull off the cards which have the most ticks, and then at the next part of the session, these are the ones that you would discuss and you would go deeper in. But what this does is it removes all the ego from the process. So that idea that really wanted to get lots of ticks, that could have come from the most junior person. It could have come from the most senior person. No one can take credit for it because it's all anonymous as well. And this is just a really nice, simple way of getting ego out of the room for doing this, allowing everyone to float their ideas to the top, and then the best ideas hopefully winning and being discussed, and then you can go into it. So that's called a brain writing technique. Very simple. You can do it on Zoom. You can do it in person as well. Just require some Post-it notes.
Definitely. And I know that you also work a lot in Asia. So when you say, for example, work with clients from different countries, do you observe any differences between the West and the East on the concepts on creativity, for example?
Yeah, one of the big differences I've kind of noticed, I've spent a lot of time, actually lived part of the time in places like Thailand as well. So I'm always very fascinated. I've always been very fascinated with, especially a lot of Eastern kind of philosophy, people like Confucius, for example. Now, in the West, the idea of creativity is because of the West is primarily a Judaic-Christian background. That's how a lot of the laws and things have been created. They have this idea that creativity is something, to be creative has to come from nowhere. That's because in the Christian, there's a Judaic Bible, the idea the world was created out of nothing in 7 days. Suddenly it just happened, and so that's very strong. So in the West, often for something to be considered to be creative, it must have come from nowhere. On the East, on the other hand, because of you have, obviously there's a more Confucius, there's a Buddhist, strong Buddhist background to this as well. The idea is kind of slightly different. Well, these things have already existed. There was no kind of beginning in that sense. So I see that often an idea to be creative is actually can be a combination of different ideas. So someone like Frederick Harron, who I know, we all kind of work with as well, another great speaker on creativity. He talks about this a lot. He talks, what is an iPhone? Well, it's a phone and a computer together, and it's had some great marketing, some great design. But, the transistor was invented in New Jersey. The World Wide Web was invented in Switzerland. Venture capital funding was invented in California. But bring all these things together and you create something new, a novel. And I think that's a big difference. So I'm personally more of a fan of thinking about creativity from an Eastern perspective, that things have always existed. And it's just about how we can do different combinations and we can blend them in different ways. I think the idea of something to be creative has to have never been thought of before, never existed in any type of form. I think that can hold you back from doing some of your most creative and innovative work. Some of the most interesting things I see are when I see, so for example, we have the ventilators just now that are going on, and they've just Mercedes Formula One, and I think it was GE, the General Electric as well. They came up with this really cool new type of device, which is not a full ventilator, but it's like sits at like a little box, and it allows, before people go onto a ventilator, to be able to kind of breathe. But that device came from something that they used in the world of Formula One racing, and that the scientists from the world of healthcare came together. So it was like bringing two things together and creating something entirely new. So I think that's a different way of thinking about creativity.
Certainly. Yeah, I think how to see new uses or new potential on things is very important as well.
Yeah.
So my last question to you today for the time being is, now that we are going through a very different time, mainly a lot of the countries are now under lockdown. So I know that from traveling to a physical location, maybe in different countries, now your focus is more on virtual presentations, keynotes or workshops.
Yes.
So may I know how you do that with your clients under this situation?
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. Bizarrely, I've never been busier. It's very weird just now because I have a background in online education. We have, where I'm filming today, we have about $30,000 worth of equipment. So I have 3 cameras, so I can go in different cameras. We have different lighting setups. If I want, I can pull up a screen here and it gives me a green screen or a black screen, or I can have a whiteboard here. I have different microphones. We have different screens. So we would kind of set up this already because I was doing some of this, for a number of years on kind of online presentations. So the way I tend to work a lot with clients that way is, I'll give you a couple of use cases. Some client, like I was doing one yesterday, which is for a large telecom company. And in their case, what they wanted to do, because all their employees are in lockdown just now, but they wanted to continue to inspire, to continue to train, to upskill their people. So they worked with a bureau like yourself, and they essentially put together a series of weekly, either kind of keynote style or weekly more kind of workshops. And so I was doing one of those yesterday. It lasted about 75 minutes. I was about a 45-minute more kind of keynote style. And then we went into Q&As. So that's one way you can do it. The other way that you can do it is where you take a little bit of a longer period of time, let's say 3 hours in a day, and you almost do, we've talked about this for like innovation day in a box, something I do with Frederick. So myself and Frederick will come and do, I might do the opening presentation. He'll do the closing presentation. We'll have a professional MC. And so the client can just almost like buy the innovation day in a box. It's fully hosted for them. And then they can get us. And that's, with those ones, we tend to be much more kind of interactive. So we're doing things, if we're using Zoom, like breakout rooms, for example. So it's a little bit more on the training side as well as the keynote side as well. Other things that I'm also starting to see just now is kind of conferences, which obviously were going to be in person, go fully online. Examples of some of the ones recently, things like Salesforce, they have their big conference every year. In 10 days, they were able to take that event and put it fully online as well. I mean, it was fascinating just kind of watching that process as a speaker. So that's where, for example, the last gig that I did, in-person gig, was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And it was for a well-known soft drinks company. And in their case, they had the CEO speaking. It was the kickoff for their year, really. They had the CEO speaking. They had the CFO speaking. They had myself as their main keynote speaker. And then they had two of their suppliers that make all the packaging also giving presentations as well. Now, frankly, what you could have done if we were doing this online, is I would give the live keynote presentation. The CEO and the CFO would also give a presentation. And I'm actually, because I can do a little bit of emceeing as well, so I'm happy to kind of do like a Q&A and a kind of fireside chat with the CEO. But then the two suppliers who were giving presentation, they were kind of quite canned presentations. So they could have recorded those in advance. And then you can just kind of play those as you do them. Another one I'm starting to see now is obviously things like live translation on Zoom. So, normally when you come into a live conference, you can have everyone, maybe they have headsets. Some people speak English, some people won't. So I'm doing one. It's coming up in Mexico. So everyone obviously speaks Spanish there. Some people speak English, but 30% of the people in attendance will speak English. So, and what we're doing there is we actually have, we're doing a number of things. We can have live translation underneath. We can have someone on a screen giving translation. And in fact, for one segment, that what we're going to actually do is I'm going to wear exactly the same clothes. We're going to pre-record the whole thing, this segment, like 20-minute segment. And then I'll give them that in advance. And then they're going to be able to put the Portuguese, the Spanish, German, some other languages, so people can select as well. So many of these things are becoming so much easier now. But I think what I would say is, if you are watching this just now and you're planning to do an online event, online conference, online meeting, online summit, then please make sure that you're working with a bureau like Priscilla and speakers like myself, or other speakers who are used to doing online, because there are different things to be thinking about. A good online speaker will be talking to you on the pre-event call about what kind of setups you want in terms of whether you want it different screens or background, or we can do multiple cameras, or there's a whole bunch of different options that you can have. But it's really only if you try and book a regular offline speaker to do an online event and they haven't done too many, it can sometimes be a little bit challenging. So just make sure that you're working with speakers who are used to doing online.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that on one hand, we may need some time to adjust because we're just not quite get used to the format. But when you're more open to it, actually you can see the merit in the technology. So Zoom and other function, a lot of the clients would like actually is the breakout rooms, which you can actually put the audiences into different rooms, have a conversation, discussion, and then come back and do a debriefing. So a lot of the boundaries or the constraints before geographical location, time zone differences, travel arrangement, those you can actually get away from with the technology. So I think,
and what I was going to say on that, Priscilla, is I did a presentation last night for a company in America, and we did a breakout rooms. They'd never done breakout rooms before. It's the first time, and they were a bit nervous. How does it work? And in their case, they were going through a challenge as an organization because all their business has gone off a cliff. And they're thinking about how to, I call it cost ovation. So how to use innovation to reduce costs, to get really agile and tight just now to see them through the next kind of year. And, I could have easily just done a typical presentation where it's just me presenting, but I really felt there was so much knowledge in the room, on that online room, that I really want to take them time that they could collaborate and discuss ideas together. So we did a breakout using breakout rooms, and we purposely put them into rooms of people that they didn't know as well. And that was really nice. And they got I gave them a little exercise to do in the room. And there's a certain way of doing breakout rooms that make them work well. And they said they got so much value from that, from being able to just talk about the institutional knowledge, knowledge that they all had internally. And I was almost like the facilitator for this. So So that's really great. And I think another thing just to think about, and I know you and I have spoken about this as well, is when we do finally start going back and the unlocking kind of happens, you may be able to run an event in a particular place. Let's say if you're running an event in I'm just going to say in Shenzhen, for example, just somewhere. If you're running an event in Shenzhen and you want that speaker who is from America, for example, but maybe there's something where the visas or there's some problem in terms of the health checks that they have to get now, stops them coming in. What I'm starting to experiment now, and other speakers are experimenting with, is holograms. So myself, Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, Peter Diamandis, who's a great futurist, Yuval Noah Harari, who's another great futurist as well. We're almost getting our own little kind of holodecks here in our studio. So we film it live in our room. We use special cameras. That hologram is then goes onto a stage somewhere in the world. It looks exactly like I'm on that stage, even though it's thousands of miles away. There's really no latency, so people can ask me questions and I can see them and we can have a conversation with them as well. So some of those things you might start to see happen, and you're going to find moments like this kind of hybrid model. Is it offline? Is it online? I'm not quite sure. It's mix.
Yes, indeed. We actually have a very good partner provider on hologram in Asia that we can work
Fantastic.
with. So yeah, I can see it coming. And another technology that we have been in conversation with is actually VR. So people can actually put on the headset and then see your avatar speaking, for example, and you can during your presentation, you can change clothes suddenly. So there's a lot of things that I think once we get over the very fixed concept of how an event can be run, there's a lot of potential. I do see that even though one day maybe the lockdown is released, the hybrid model definitely would be something that we'll see more often, and there would be more creativity in how to organize an event in future.
And the thing, to be more kind of also quite positive about things as we start to finish up here, for all of our lives, all civilization, it's always been, countries against countries or towns against towns. This is probably one of the first times truly in history that as a human race, we have a common enemy, which is not other humans. And so one of the things that's really been I find it quite uplifting is I see, scientists, doctors, health people, inventors, engineering companies all across the world collaborating creatively and creating things to defeat a common enemy. And I think that's actually, as we kind of start to come out of this, I hope some of that collaboration, cross boundaries, cross countries really starts to continue, because we are all in this together. We're going through this exactly the same time. I feel as connected now because of online with that person that's sitting there in Hong Kong, like yourself, or that person that's sitting there in Johannesburg. So I think there's actually there's many good things that will come out of what is otherwise a pretty terrible time just now.
Indeed, and I think during crisis, people actually get more creative because you have a real problem to solve. So yeah, I hope we can make the best use of the pandemic and become an even better race and individual after we've gone through that.
Fantastic.
So thank you very much for the time today. There's a lot of information. So I hope the audiences, our clients, when you watch this video, can get some good insights from James today. And if you need more information or would like to engage James for your future events or conferences, be it offline or online, do contact us. So thank you very much for today, and take care. And I hope to see you in person very soon as well.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Take care. Bye-bye.